Why don't you just start us off with a little bit on how these laws actually are meant to work?
Well, the way they're meant to work is they're supposed to fill a hole in the law, essentially, because, presently we know that a felon cannot possess a weapon. It can't possess a gun. And then there are certain types of mental health adjudications that can result in a deprivation of your right to own a gun. So, but there is a big range between someone who's a felon and somebody who's actually gone through the kind of adjudication that results in, or the kind of state mental health process that results in the deprivation of an ability to own a weapon, where there are people who are quite disturbed and exhibit that they're disturbed, but either they don't tip all the way over into the level of mental illness that would lead to a kind of adjudication that can bar access to a weapon, or quite frankly, the process of a mental health adjudication is so opaque. And so, if I ask even the most well-informed person in my neighborhood, how do you involuntarily commit a person in Tennessee? They have no clue. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how to do this. And so, one of the purposes of a red flag law is to say, okay, somebody is manifesting threatening behavior. Somebody is manifesting that they're unbalanced. Somebody is engaging in violent ideation or suicidal ideation. And we just want to press pause on their ability to possess a weapon while we either begin a mental health adjudication or determine the applicability of criminal law to their behavior. And one of the reasons for the ideas for these laws is that if you go back through the history of mass shootings, time and time again, you will find evidence of prior, you'll find evidence of prior ideation around mass killing. You'll find prior existence of threatening types of communications, but things that don't necessarily arise to the level of a criminal act. But the person is sort of radiating that they're dangerous. And people say, why couldn't we do anything? Well, the answer to why we couldn't do anything is that, in particular, the mental health aspect of the American system is frankly just broken and opaque. And so this gives the ability to press pause. And, in this circumstance with the shooter in Buffalo, this should have been exactly the kind of situation for which red flag laws were drafted, because he had issued threatening communications about his school. He was actually even taken into custody. Well, either taken into custody or went with the police, investigated by the police. And that's the idea. That is exactly the paradigm for this kind of law. And it wasn't applied. Even though it exists in New York, it wasn't applied. And
so that's history. That's the key point here, right? Is that this shooter in Buffalo, first of all, you're correct. A lot of these guys who carry out these sorts of, horrific attacks do exhibit some warning signs beforehand, and rather serious ones in most cases. You saw it in Parkland, where that shooter had made a number of threats. He'd also committed, domestic violence against his mother at certain points. He'd attempted suicide. There were a lot of things that could have
by time,
where an intervention could have kept him from being able to at least legally buy guns, even without the red flag law in place. Although Florida did pass one after that incident. You saw with the Aurora, Colorado theater shooter as well. He had met with a psychiatrist on campus and expressed homicidal thoughts, and but apparently the psychiatrist didn't believe it was specific enough threat to lead to involuntary commitment in that state. And then, yes, the Buffalo here, we had this shooter describe a threat towards, or a desire to kill himself or others to a teacher at his school last year in June. he was taken by police to a mental health facility where he was examined over the course of a day and a half, apparently, in this facility, and then released without being involuntarily. I mean, I guess there's some still not a lot of detail as to why that doesn't qualify as involuntary commitment. Perhaps he had agreed to do this on a voluntary basis before being released. But you're right. Nobody in that chain had initiated a extreme risk protection order, as the sort of the technical term for a red flag order. And in New York, anyone really in that group could have. The school, the police, the prosecutors can do it in New York, and so can family members of the at least parents can. And nobody did. And so a few months later, he was able to buy the gun that he ended up using in this attack, which would not have been possible if he had been subject to one of these orders. Now, I guess, in your opinion, based on those facts, we don't, because nobody actually went through the process, we don't know for sure that he would have been, that an order would have been issued against him. So I want to get your take on it. It seems that you're saying this is
highly likely, because the burden of proof of getting an order in New York is not incredibly difficult to meet. And the pattern here is consistent with the kind of behavior manifested by other mass shooters. And so, one of the best things that I would urge people to go and read this document, and that this is Governor Doug Ducey, after of Arizona, Republican governor of Arizona, after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, commissioned a report for essentially a school safety program for Arizona. And so what he did is he went through the report went through every major school shooting. And now we know this was a supermarket shooting, not a school shooting, but the deadliest school shooting of the last 20 years, from Virginia Tech to Sandy Hook to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas to Columbine to Umpqua Community College, and looked at whether one of these red flag type laws could have been applicable. And it could have been applicable in every single one of them under a conventional drafting of a red flag law. And so I do think that under the way these laws are drafted, it fits within the scope of the law. Now, the problem you have is any law is only as good as its enforcement. So, for example, we've seen people who, under existing law, should not have been able to purchase a gun, yet were were allowed to purchase a gun, and went on and committed a mass shooting. I believe it's the Sutherland Springs is one of the most notable of these. And so, you can have a background check system, and if the background check system fails, then if it's only, these laws have to be enforced by human beings, and the human beings have to be educated and competent. And one thing I think is
why you think that there wasn't an ERPO issued in this incident, where they're just do you think it was a lack of knowledge on the part of the police or school administrators, or maybe a cultural, this was a small town in New York, where maybe they don't look at the red flag laws, and we'll get into some of the critiques in a little bit, but red flag laws are controversial. They are, not looked on positively in large parts of the country, probably including this area of rural New York where this happened, where he was, where he was initially evaluated, right? So what do you think was the actual?
It's total speculation, but the bottom line is, if you talk to somebody who is deeply involved in the gun violence debate, they'll know what a red flag law is, or an emergency or order of protection, whatever. There's all these different names that are used at different states, which is a problem all by itself because it inhibits education about the issue. If you have 17 different names for the same phenomenon. But if you're somebody who's very educated in the gun rights debate, you know what these are. But I bet you if you and I went out and we just grabbed 100 people off the street and said, do you know what this is? And describe, do you know what a red flag log is, or an emergency order of protection or whatever? How many of them say they know? 1, 2, 3? If you grabbed a random cop, I wonder how many of them would know. So, in a way, what we have is an issue where you do have a system that is more simple than an actual involuntary commitment and adjudication of mental illness, but is almost just as unknown. So there are there are red flag orders that are implemented. They've been implemented many times in Florida. They've been implemented many times in various parts of the country, but they are still not known. And so I do think it's possible that the parents and or police knew of the laws and subjectively believed that his behavior didn't meet the standard. It's also quite possible that they just didn't know, or that they hadn't been adequately trained. So I hope that we'll have at the end of the day a very comprehensive investigation that dives into this specific point, because it's just speculation now as to the reason.